Welcome to the Intentional Man Podcast, a podcast that inspires and equips men to lead lives of intentionality and grow to their full potential. I'm your host, Jonathan McGinley, a life coach that helps men just like you create the life that you want and live a story of significance through my coaching and tools on intentionality. Thanks for joining, and welcome to the show. Hello, welcome to the show. I'm excited for today and excited for this episode. I have a great friend, a mentor of mine, Carl Sutter, with us today. Carl, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jonathan. It's good to see you. Happy New Year to you. It's just really good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And Carl, he is the founding pastor of Foundations Church in Loveland, Colorado, and has just been a rock in the community here in Northern Colorado for a long time. And I heard him speak on this topic that we're going to dive into today not too long ago. And it was just really impactful for me. And I think this is something that a lot of men really deal with, and that's passivity. And that's something that we talk a lot about on this show is really fighting passivity, rejecting passivity, and living an intentional life. And so Carl's got an amazing story and testimony and just some great thoughts around this topic. So that's why I wanted to bring him in today, and he graciously accepted to give us some of his time. So just excited to dive in. So honestly, we're just going to get right to it, Carl. When we talk about this word passivity, what comes to mind for you? Like, how would you define that?
Yeah, I think passivity is it's big, right? Because it manifests itself in many areas. But I think it's when we shrink back from stepping into our full power, from stepping into our full responsibilities, when we kind of hide, repress, and deny the true person that we are. Yeah,
that's really good. Why do you think this is something that so many men struggle with? And I know I've struggled with it too. It's a big reason why I started this show, honestly, was to fight against this. So why do you think it is that we as men really kind of have to fight through this a lot?
Yeah, and that's a big question, right?
It's a big question.
Issue. I think for me, there's two things that come to mind. One is, I'm a person of faith, so it just seems to me as I read the Bible that from the very beginning, man was kind of almost cursed with this lineage that we passed down of a gene of passivity. It goes way back to the story of Adam and Eve when Eve was tempted, and I read the story, and then I was astounded when I found out when she was talking to Satan and being tempted, and then she finally caved into the temptation, ate the fruit, and then the Bible says she turned to Adam who was with her. And so the whole time, this dialogue that would end up really wreaking havoc throughout the universe, right? For all time. This is a cataclysmic discussion, right? It wasn't just some side conversation. Adam was there, but failed to be present. He just failed. So I think from there, as my belief system, because I've seen it, because I ask myself that question so much. Why are we? I think all men have to wrestle with a natural propensity to be passive.
Yeah.
And then I think what's happened is in our modern culture where women's rights, and it's fantastic that years ago, it was such an agricultural kind of economy that strength meant money. But with the advent of technology, now all you do is push a button. And we found out that women can push a button as well, if not better than a man.
Probably better.
Yeah. And so they have been able now, and praise God for it. I got daughters. I want them to succeed and be successful. But now they're moving into the upper echelons of management. They're quicker, faster in many ways than we are. And so that tends to disrupt a man. It's like I'm supposed to be a leader in some way, but yet my wife is faster, smarter, makes more money than me. And I think that really compounds the passivity that we all wrestle with.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking back to that story in the Garden of Eden. And most of the time you think, it's just Eve who ate the fruit. And then she goes and she convinces Adam, like you picture her then taking the fruit and running over and finding him and then giving him the fruit. But actually, yeah, like you said, it said Adam was there, which is crazy because you would think he would have said something and all this tempting and all this convincing and stuff. But he was right there. And I think it is a picture of a lot of times what it is so easy to fall into as a man is to, in those situations, we know what to say. We know what to do. We know who we want to be. All these things where it's like, we know, but there's something inside of us that just keeps us from speaking up or keeps us from acting and keeps us, kind of playing small and shying away. Right. What do you think some of those factors are? Is it lack of confidence? Is it, what would it be that keeps us playing small oftentimes?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Jonathan, because I think, like going back to that story, God knew this was all going to happen, and he kind of prepared Adam, and it says God talked to Adam face to face, right? Mm-hmm. So it was crystal clear what God wanted from Adam. But this is how I think the world works. I think the temptation didn't come straight at Adam, because my hunch is if it did, he would have been able to address it and say, hey, get out. This is what but it came sideways. And so how I have kind of wrestled with that is that I think men are really great when there's boundaries and there's a clear win. And there's a clear winner. There's a clear path to take. We're good at sports. We're good at hunting. We're good at even in the business world when money kind of defines, if that's what defines success, we're great at that. A lot of men are great. But when you put that same man in an atmosphere of ambiguity, where it's like, I'm not quite sure what a real win is here, then I do think what you said, Jonathan, fear, uncertainty, lack of confidence, don't want to make a mistake, can really paralyze us and put us in a passive mindset.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's actually really interesting to think of it that way. The fear of uncertainty or just situations, because as men, we like to have control, right? I mean, it's just human nature. Like we like to have control. So in those situations where it doesn't quite feel like you have full control or you don't quite feel totally confident, those are the moments that are really hard to step out. And I think in our lives, a lot of times we don't take the time to do the work to think about the man that I want to become, or to think about these are the values that I live by, or whatever it is. So then it actually makes our lives a little ambiguous in terms of, if we don't know who we are, what we want to be, what we stand for, it's going to be really hard to actually not be passive, like you just said. Yeah.
It's well said. It's well said. Yeah.
So I think that's super interesting. I'd love to, you kind of shared a lot of your story and it really wraps into this. I'm sure we'll kind of have a lot of lessons to pull from it. So I'd love to just kind of give our listeners just a glimpse into that. So was this something that you really kind of struggled with growing up, and where did it begin? Where was kind of the beginning to that for you?
Yeah, it did, Jonathan. So I was raised in a family of 3 boys, and I have 2 older brothers, 4 and 8 years older, so they're considerably older. We love sports, and so whenever we would even play just around the house, my brothers always won, right? They always made sure that they won. As they got a little older, they wrestled with some things in life. We had, my father was an angry guy, disciplined us out of anger. And I think that spilled down. And so my brothers were, I wouldn't say totally physically abusive, nor totally emotionally abusive, but that's where it leaned all the time. And so for me to survive in a family that had a lot of anger and some chaos in it, I learned at a young age, I learned that if I stay quiet, stay out of the limelight, and don't acknowledge even truth, just acknowledge what they think is truth, then I will stay safe. Yeah. So let them win. Let them win an argument. Let them win a game of 21 if we played basketball or whatever. Let them win, because then my life would be a lot easier. So I had this kind of environment where passivity rewarded me.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. And did that kind of carry on once you left the house, like in college, and, did you kind of feel that carry on?
Yeah, and I was a decent. I wasn't great, but I was a decent athlete. But I noticed I gravitated towards non-contact sports. So
Hmm.
I played a lot of baseball. I know basketball can be a contact sport, but not as much as football. So I stayed away from wrestling, football, those things. And so that's how I kind of gravitate to it. Always quiet person. So my brothers both struggled with alcohol and drugs. They both did. Um, I think the lie that was embedded in my soul, stay quiet and you'll stay safe. That lie was so powerful because it worked in my childhood. I
Right.
avoided a lot of the booby traps, the outward booby traps that my brothers
Hmm.
fell into, because I think that lie was so good. I think it's good for men all to look back at what was the story that we used in childhood, because I think there's a lot of upside that got people through their childhood if it was a rough one, but that lie came with a lot of baggage that would really manifest itself as I moved into my adulthood.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and that does make sense, when you think about that. And it's interesting how something that worked in your childhood, or some, mechanism that you had to use to stay safe or to stay healthy, ended up kind of biting you later
Absolutely.
in your life later. So talk about that. When did you kind of like realize this moment that maybe you are living this more passive lifestyle, or you're not speaking up? When did it finally kind of click for you that that was happening?
Well, I knew it manifested itself in college, and I started my career a little bit. Uh, but I was kind of used to, not always speaking up, go along to get along. And I could do that even though it had a low level of frustration.
Uh-huh.
It took on a whole new life of its own when I got married. And I didn't
Yeah.
know how to stand up for myself. I didn't know how to resolve conflict. I didn't know how to understand. And then you bring kids into the mix. And so I could, with a friendship, I could go along to get along. In a marriage, I was going along to get along, but my resentment was just going off the charts.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So there were some things going on that you just weren't able to speak up for, or to kind of
That's right.
resolve. So you just pushed it down and buried it down. And yeah, I mean, I can relate to that too, for sure. Of like, and even sometimes when you're kind of like the nice guy, right? Like it seems like
Yes.
you shouldn't be, you shouldn't have any conflict. You can just let it slide. You can let it go. Um, and for me, a lot of times I've done that in my life, just thinking, oh, I'll just deal with it. I can get over it. It's not that big a deal. Not worth
Right.
confronting somebody. But then you kind of do realize that, man, there is this resentment building up in me because I didn't deal with it. So how, I mean, what would you say in that situation, to somebody like yourself, like me, who thinks it's peacemaking or whatever? Like what's the difference between passive and peacemaking, and when you should speak out?
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good question. Great question. I think so. For me, passivity to me is when I ignore my own rights to make other people happy. My
yeah,
brothers were very aggressive. So a passive. I violate my own rights to make others happy. My brothers aggressive violated other people's rights um, to make themselves happy. And
wow,
so I would not hardly ever get angry. But when it got too much, like Papa, I can't. That's all I can stand. I can't stand. I would use anger, which is not healthy. It destroyed my first marriage. Actually, I would
yeah,
use anger to give me the power to speak truth. So I think the
yeah,
way I'm learning now, and I'm still learning. I still have a propensity to be passive. What I'm learning is passivity. Don't violate my own rights. Don't violate other people's rights, but learn the skill of standing up for my rights without making other people bad or violating their rights. Just
yeah.
speak my truth and be gracious and kind in
Hmm.
that situation. Easier said than done, but
For
that's the
sure.
path I'm trying to walk down now.
Yeah. No, that's really, really good. When let's just go back to maybe your marriage or coming out, when you're feeling passive, what was underneath that? Was there a lack of confidence? Was there a lack of self-worth? Was there a proving to, like wanting to prove yourself to others? Like, 'cause I think there is a layer underneath that a lot of times of why we, you know, don't speak up, or why we don't handle situations, or why we don't pursue things that are difficult or pursue big dreams. We like to play it easy. What do you think is behind that, either for you or that you've seen working with men?
Well, for me, certainly it's for me it was a lack of confidence, not knowing how to step into leadership, to lead my family, I could lead when things were okay, but again, when things were rough, that was hard. And the
Yeah.
marriage really put fuel to the fire, so to speak, because in all my relationships, I probably was passive in all of them. But if it's a friendship and let's say they're 60 and I'm 40%, let's just say arbitrarily, I could
Yeah.
go home and live with that, right? It's like, oh, okay, they get their way a little bit, but I'm okay with not always getting my way. But when you're in a marriage where it's the only way it can really flourish, in my opinion, is 50-50, I wasn't used to that. I didn't know how to do 50-50. So I'd let her
Yeah.
win and think, well, that's okay. But now I can't go away and I'm married to her, right? And every fiber of my existence is entangled with this person who
Yeah.
seemingly is winning, right? And it's not that she wants to win. It's just, she's just doing what she should do, being around a passive person. But
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
resentment began to grow. And
Mhm.
then it comes out sideways and really sabotaged an environment of intimacy.
Yeah. 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 So what was kind of the turning point for you then, where you really kind of stepped into this new, more intentional life, more, courageous life, so to say, or found new confidence? What was kind of the turning point there for you to step out of that season of passivity?
That's a big question, Jonathan. Right? I mean,
A big
because
question.
now I wish I could
Yeah.
say I was enlightened and just started learning and maturing. Right? That's
It's
not how
usually
it
not how it
happened.
works.
It happened. I lost everything. I
Mm,
became a pastor, and I don't want to get into all that, but it's
yeah.
interesting that I did because I think in my thinking way back then, I was always attracted and gravitated to safe environments. And in my naivete, I thought the church is a safe place, right?
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
interesting that that's where I went as a profession. Found out it's not safe at all. It's almost more dangerous because it's masked with safety, but behind
Yeah.
it, there's a lot of anger and frustration. My wife and I had a terrible marriage. I was getting angry at her, but I didn't know how to use anger. My anger
Mm,
came out sideways when I actually crossed some boundaries in our marriage,
hmm.
which cost me my job. So here's how I learned to try. This was my journey to begin to learn. Was
Yeah.
I hit rock bottom?
Yeah.
My passivity cost me my marriage, my kids for a couple years because it was just bad. My
Hmm.
job, my profession. I was rock bottom, and there I
Yeah.
decided, you know what? If I don't learn how to do life differently, I am really doomed for a
Mm,
dismal future.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, for sure. And I do think a lot of times it does take a moment like that of rock bottom or some drastic, situation to kind of wake us up, to knock us off, this
Yeah.
kind of coasting through and living with passivity. What would you say to somebody right now who, might be living a more passive lifestyle, but hasn't gotten to that point of rock bottom? How do you fight against passivity before you have to hit, a place like that? Because I feel like I see that all the time where it's like we just do the same thing and just coast through until once we have that moment, then we really respond, and we might respond really well. But how do you kind of protect against that before you have to go through something that traumatic or tough?
That's $1 million question, Jonathan.
Yes, it is.
Um, I think it starts with trying to be more self aware, right?
Mm,
Where I have to be aware of where my anger is. I have to be aware of where I'm blaming, because I think blaming is a learning disorder, right? I mean, I stopped learning about myself if I could blame somebody. If life is going bad, then I need to blame means I need to find a villain.
Yeah.
Well, the minute I point my finger at somebody who I make them a villain, that immediately puts me in the space of victim. You can't have a villain without a victim. So I want to look at how my anger is doing. I want to look at ways I'm escaping reality. Am I drinking too much? Am I looking at stuff I shouldn't be looking at? Where am I avoiding? Am I eating too much? All these things that men do that in and of themselves they're not wrong, but if they do them to excess, I think it's a sign that we are ignoring some warning signals that are built in that can help us address these issues. But when we ignore them, we do so at great peril to ourselves and to our loved ones around us.
Yeah. That's really good. That's really profound. I think just thinking about that and self-awareness and having others, I mean, that makes me think just surrounding yourself with other men who can actually help you realize those things, because sometimes it's hard to see on your own, to actually see what you're doing. And so to actually have that awareness, sometimes you just need other people that you really trust that can kind of help speak into that, but also just that self-aware piece. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that's brilliant. And that's a point that needs to be emphasized, right? Because I think, this is just my belief system, Jonathan, I think men get their power from two sources. Because I'm a man of faith, I think God is one, but I also think we get it from other men in close relationships. Most men, I did this, still maybe have a temptation to, most men try to get their validation and power from women, which is really not how we were wired. However, I will say this. What happened to me, my crash happened at 42, which is way too late. So there's a guy listening here, don't wait till 42. That's too late. The scars run deep. But I was always around men because I like sports, and I was just more comfortable around men than I was around women. But it was pseudo relationships, not honest relationships where men spoke truth. We were vulnerable to one another. Your point is brilliant. We do need other men, but just because I'm hanging around men doesn't mean I need men to tell me the truth in a loving way, but I need men to tell me the truth, not just to always, because we men a lot of times give other men passes when we need to really stand up and confront some men who we see heading in places where they shouldn't go.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I do think there's a big difference there of having good male relationships where you talk sports and you have fun and you hang out and you do things together, which is great and that's needed. And I think that's a great outlet that we for sure need. But it does take just another level of intentionality to have those deeper conversations. And it's something that honestly I've kind of struggled to do over the course of my life. And I'm realizing more and more and more how important that is, to go to those deeper places. Do you have any kind of tips or things that have worked in your life to kind of take your relationships deeper, or to find those, or to have the courage to actually speak up to your friends? Because that one's tough too, of just, if you see them doing something, it's hard not to want to, step on their toes. So any insights there?
Well, yeah, I think, well, for me, when I lost everything, right? I mean, and I literally lost everything based, and there could be, and I had a story on why, until I realized, a friend helped me realize that it was all on my passivity. And I remember, and this is important, he said to me, I had no friends. He picked me up. We went to a bar. I told him my story, how my life just totally disintegrated. I'm crying in the bar. And he leans back and says, "Isn't God's grace wonderful?" And I wanted to fly across the table and punch him. It's like, man,
for sure.
I'm talking about how my life's destroyed. How in the world can you say this is good? And then he said this sentence, I'll never forget it. He says, if your life is being built on a false foundation, the most loving thing that can happen is for that foundation to be blown up.
Wow.
I go, wow. Because my marriage was built on a false, my faith was built on a false foundation. My job, my friendships. So I had the gift of starting over. So I immediately got involved with men's groups, and there's a ton of them now. I won't tell you which one because there's so many of them. Yeah. But I think it's good for men to go to sometimes a men's weekend, because those are men who are like-minded, and we get in small groups and we set the parameters of what we want in our group moving forward. Because I think there's always in men, and this is big truth in my life, even though that happened at 42, I think there's always the tendency for men to lean towards their sword, if I could use that word, getting dull. And so we got to put ourselves in environments where we're challenged, and men who are willing to step up and challenge me and tell the truth, what they see, at great risk, right? And also to receive truth at great risk too, where I won't get defensive. So you have to find like-minded men who every year or whatever go away and will stretch outside their comfort zone. I hate going on those weekends. I never like going to them. I try to find a million reasons to avoid them, right? I hate it. Yeah. But I always come back and say, that was profound. Because the tendency in my life is to go softer and softer, even though I've seen the devastation of passivity.
Yeah. Which, I think that's kind of just natural. If you're not moving forward, if you're not being intentional, if you're not growing with others, then typically we are moving backwards. And it's hard to realize it until some event happens. Yeah. So I really appreciate you sharing that wisdom of just like a good reminder of that really is the truth, I believe, of if you're not growing, you're either going one or two directions. You're either growing or you're slowly kind of moving back. And I think that's where I found myself a lot. I think that's where men, we find ourselves a lot of kind of that slowly moving backwards because we isolate ourselves, because we don't have a vision for what we want our lives to be, because we're not waking up each day with a purpose and knowing what we want our lives to be about. And so if you get stuck without doing those things or constantly reflecting on your life, like you said earlier, all of a sudden you kind of just find yourself slipping into this zone of passivity. And so that's what the intentional man is about. It's just waking up each day and really thinking about those things and going and finding men and going and finding men's retreats and doing the work. It is work, but it is necessary. So talking about passivity, and I know you've mentioned it in your story, kind of the effect it had, but what would you say, like, why is this so important to fight? Because everything I just said sounds like work. It sounds like time. It sounds like thought. So why is it so important to do those things and to really be on the front end of this?
Well, man, that's a big question, right? Because it has multi layers to it. One is, I think, one is that just on an individual, it helps us be true to ourselves. Because what you just said, if men are not on purpose, living with passion, and I kind of use a word that has some sexual connotation, so it doesn't mean it, but because I think our anatomy says we have to live with purpose, and we have to penetrate our world. That's why I think we're here, to penetrate the darkness in the world, to penetrate passivity, to penetrate the woundedness in women. If I'm not doing that, I will find life in artificial ways, and those artificial ways are very destructive to the man himself and to the people around us. So the world needs men. Our families need men. Yeah. Women need men, not a brutal man, not a passive man, but a man who has the beautiful, I think, almost irresistible for a woman, character trait of being strong, but being gracious. Yeah. Strong. And our kids need it. Our school systems need it. Everywhere we go, I think right now, more than ever in my lifetime, we need men to step up and to penetrate our world, not in a passive way, not in an aggressive way, not in a passive-aggressive way, but in a way that's redemptive with grace and truth.
I love that. I love that picture. And you even said that earlier with your brothers and you, and the contrast there of, they use their power to inflict that on others, and you kind of shied away from it. So, because I
Yes.
think you could hear something like this and be like, oh my gosh, I want to fight passivity, and let's go drive and let's go, speak our truths over and over and over. But I think that balance of grace and truth and still humility and courage, like the kind of a balance between those things of finding yourself in the middle where you're not running over people, but you're not laying back and being passive.
No.
Do you have any other thoughts of how to live in the middle there?
I just say this. This is a tangent, maybe. I don't know. You could cut this out later if it doesn't work. But I think every man needs to figure out what makes us powerful. How do I feel powerful? I don't want to get crazy on this, but I was struggling as a young boy, right? Struggling as a young boy. I know I'm not powerful. I know I'm not. I know I back down from things. I don't know. I was 10, 11, 12. I can't really remember. But I do know at the same time, just accidentally, like every guy, I discovered masturbation. And in that moment, I felt real powerful. And so that became an escape for me. When I didn't feel powerful, that's where I would run, right? And then even my sex drive got kind of crazy about I don't want to get into all this, but my sex drive was more not about connecting with the person. It was more about power, having power over a person. And so even now, I got to be careful of my fantasy world. I want men who will challenge me on this. It's hard to find men that embarrass themselves because I have to ask myself, where is Carl finding power? Because if I'm not finding power in authentic relationships, there's a fantastic chance that I'm going to places that are not really powerful. It's pseudo power, and that doesn't serve me. So I need to ask myself and have people ask me questions the only way they could ask me those questions if I was vulnerable with them and saying, here's some things, I need some guardrails here.
Yeah.
So if I hit a guardrail, I don't go into a ditch. Can you help me with what I'm putting my eyes at? Can you help me with what I'm doing, even privately, masturbation and temptation in that area? All those things. Those are hard questions. I don't ask people in my church that. That's too embarrassing to ask their pastor, right? So I have to find men who will say, how are you doing? And are you really telling the truth here? Because men have a desire, it's in us, to be a powerful. Wild at Heart is John Eldridge's book. We have the software. The software system is we're wired to be wild at heart. So where am I finding that? And am I? And where am I not? And if I'm not, I'm finding it in artificial places. So keep looking at yourselves. Keep asking men who you trust. And there's only a couple in my life who I really trust to say, where is Carl not showing up fully Carl?
Yeah. Wow. That's all really, really good. I think that question, where am I finding my power, is a great question to ask. Because living without, that power, like you just mentioned, as men, like we should have that in some outlet, but a lot of times we attach it into, outlets that are not healthy. Where have you found, when you're at your best, when you're your best self, like where are you putting that power? Where are you finding that then? If a guy's like, man, I need to make sure it's in the right place, what would be your advice?
Well, that's great. I think I'm putting it into my inner circle. So I'm trying to breathe life into my wife. Right. That's a whole nother podcast. Right?
Yeah,
that's complicated because women, and my belief is women don't really respect or are drawn to weakness in their man. So my woman will test me. I think all women test their men, and I'll just speak for me, but I think it's true for a lot of men. I don't like it when my woman tests me. I want to move away from her when really I think God has designed me to move towards her. So even when I'm hurt, so here's some lessons for me. When I'm hurt, am I moving towards my wife? Am I moving towards people at work? Am I moving towards making a difference in this world? Am I moving towards those things? Because all men, I believe this, we like to escape from it, and there's a healthy part to it. That's why we like sports. It's just I could shut down and watch a game, or I could go out in the woods and hunt. Those are beautiful. They're redemptive. They feed us. But I also have to have an arena. There's three good tests that Wild at Heart has, right? Eldridge says there's an adventure to live, a battle to fight, and a beauty to rescue. Those are good benchmarks for me. Am I rescuing my beauty or running away from her or arguing with her? Do I have adventure in my life? Or is my life just pretty passive and just milquetoast? And what battle am I fighting? Am I fighting for my kids? Am I fighting for our culture, our country? Am I fighting for those things? Men are wired to do that.
Yeah. That's great. Well, and that just makes me think of, we're wired to fight for a cause. And a lot of times if we don't have a cause or a passion or a purpose, that's where it's like, man, if you don't have anything that's waking you up excited, or, your why, your family, your kids, whatever it is, then it is really easy to fall into passivity, because I think we were created to do that, and to fight. And so you're fighting for others. You're fighting for a purpose. You're fighting for something greater than yourself. You're not fighting for money and power and fame. Those are the things that are easy to put our power in our, to fight for those things. But if you're doing it for something bigger, if you're doing it for other people, if you're fighting for something greater than yourself, I think that's where you can really find kind of that good middle ground of being powerful, but being humble, being, courageous, but not running through people, for sure. So
it's awesome.
Yeah. Really good stuff. So I think just kind of to wrap it up, what would you say to a young man? He's in his 20s. He's coming up, from the lessons that you've learned, from everything that we've kind of talked about today. What would be your charge of like, hey, this is how you can fight passivity. Here's a few practical tips or lessons you need to keep in front of you. What would just be kind of your recap there?
Yeah, I tell younger men, never before are you needed. Our culture needs you, our society needs you. If you're married, your wife needs you. If you're not married, there is a woman out there who needs you, that will experience her destiny and calling when a strong man comes alongside. And here's the thing. Every day the world is our gymnasium to develop this muscle, because every day I'm confronted in a myriad of ways. Is Carl going to be passive, or am I going to be overly aggressive? Every day, in relationships, at work, in the grocery store. I'll just say this. I was in downtown. I was working in Indianapolis one day, and there was this long line. It was lunch. It was like in a Walgreens. Long line, right? A long line. We're all waiting there trying to get something, go back to our job. And this guy cut in line, right? And everybody's angry at the guy, right? Nobody says a word, right? So there it is. There's life. Here it just happens. It'll find us. And so I says, what should I do? And so I said, all right, I'm going to do something. You could be a jerk and say, hey, idiot, get in the back of the line. I don't want to do that, right? So I went up to the guy and I says, hey, man, we're all waiting in line. The back of the line is here. That's where the back of the line is. He said, F you, flipped me off, right? And stood there in line. Right. And other couple people said, no, man, you got to go to the back of the line. And so it didn't matter to me if he went to the back of the line or not. What happened is I wanted to exercise my muscle to speak truth in a tough situation. Yeah. We face that almost every day on various levels, right? So I want to be cognizant. Where am I shrinking from standing in my truth? I don't always have to win. It's not about winning. It's about me being the man that I believe God wants me to be.
I love that. That's a great story and a great example to leave us with. And that's not something that I think about all the time, is, developing that muscle of speaking my truth and standing up for what I believe in. There's a lot of moments where you let those things slide, where you don't speak up when you should have, or you weren't as courageous as you should have been. And it doesn't feel like a big deal in the moment. But I think just that picture that you gave of practice, and you're developing a muscle, and, you're doing that, if you do that consistently where you do speak up for it, then in the bigger moments, in the monumental moments, then you actually have this practice and this habit of actually being courageous and being bold and, speaking up for what you believe in. So I love that. So that's a great way to kind of wrap it up, guys. Think about that in your daily life, even today, as you're driving to work or wherever you're listening to this. Think about those moments throughout the day where maybe you typically shrink back, or maybe you don't speak up for yourself, or maybe those things at work where you're coasting, or the relationships in life where you're coasting or you're being passive. And let's fight that today. Let's go fight that today. So I love that. Carl, how can we as a community support you? Is there anything you got going on that we can, be involved with?
Well, Jonathan, I'll just say this real quickly. My crash happened at 42, so while I have a job and all that, really the purpose of my life too now is to help men find their clean and redemptive power. So nothing you can. I just want to say kudos to you, Jonathan. You're a man's man. I knew that from the time I met you. There's something really compelling about you. You've helped me grow. When I'm around you, I just feel strength. You're a powerful guy. So keep doing what you're doing, Jonathan. Let your light shine. I think this is a gift to men. So any way we could blow oxygen on this thing to make it bigger and bigger and bigger, I want to be connected to Jonathan. So thank you for the gift that you're bringing to the community of men.
Wow. Thank you so much. That means a lot. And it means a lot that you would take time to be with us and to share your story. Thank you for being so honest and vulnerable and just sharing with us some of your lessons. And I know this was greatly impactful for me, so I believe it's going to be for sure for our listeners. So thank you for your time.
Joy hanging with you, Jonathan. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Intentional Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to support the show, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and leave a rating and review. If you are someone who is looking to take your life to the next level, accelerate your success, and live more intentionally, I would love to help. Shoot me a text at 970-430-6085, and we can schedule a time to meet to discuss your vision and your goals. Again, that is 970-430-6085. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, build a life that matters by living intentionally.